I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. This week's episode is about stocking the perfect kitchen. And that means a lot of different things for a lot of people, but this is going to be kind of just a quick summary of if you have these things in your kitchen, your fridge, your pantry, a couple of little gadgets and tools. It makes it really easy to make a wide variety of things. So it keeps you just super versatile in your kitchen. Before we get into the what to have, I think it's also really important to talk about what to not have. And so when we look at wellness and we look at the choices we make through the day, I look at it as surrounding ourselves with options that are going to support our wellness. And we need to do that in our homes and our kitchens, but it's also what's in our offices, in our desk drawers, or right in our space there. What's in our gym bags, our workout bags, our purses, our cars. What are the things that we either have or don't have there that are either supporting or sabotaging our wellness? So, first, I would say clear out the things that are tempting for you. A lot of times, I can't tell you how many times I've had a client who has like knocked back the entire bag of Doritos, Oreos, whatever it is, crackers, name it. It could be whatever. And I'll be like, well, why did you have that? We've been working on this. Like, why? Well, it's for my kids or my spouse or my husband, or I bought it for so and so. But the reality is they're the ones eating it. So we can always excuse it that, oh, I'm getting it for, fill in the blank. But if we're the ones who typically are, picking away at it, we probably need to stop buying it. Or if the person in your life is going to be really upset, or you feel like for whatever reason, these foods that are really tempting to you in some way that it's needed for whatever reason, then consider having those in a whole separate space. They're either in a drawer that is like really low, or it's really high, or maybe it's in a different room, something that really has to inconvenience you to get to these. But definitely rethink what you're bringing into your home. And if you're bringing things in that are not nutritious under the guise that they are for other people, first of all, do those people need those as well? And who's really eating it? So clearing out those types of things is going to be key, because again, it all comes down to surrounding ourselves with the best options to fuel our wellness. And when we are going through our days and we have that strike of temptation, or that craving hits, if it's right there and we can reach for it without much effort, that's way too easy to sabotage ourselves. So we want to clear those types of things out. The other thing that we really want to clear out, though, is clutter. And that can be an undertaking. I know that can be like an entire day, but at least take it a shelf at a time. Carve out, 20 minutes if you can, and start looking at things. How long has this been in here? If it's got gunk on it or it's expired, toss it. If you don't recognize it, you can't remember why you bought it, you haven't used it in over a year, toss it. The more cluttered our space is, the harder it is for us to focus on one thing. That's no surprise at all. But also, the more cluttered our space is, the harder it is for us to focus on eating healthfully. Clutter can actually derail our best intentions to make healthy choices. So clutter is truly bad for our health. So as much as we can declutter the pantry, the fridge, and kind of start to throw out what we haven't used in a long time, throw out what's expired, organize it, put like things together as much as you can, but make it appealing, pleasant. It doesn't have to look like, these Instagram posts of people's things that are all color organized and they look like art when they open their fridge. That's not what we're talking about, but at least just make it to where you don't feel like you open the pantry and stuff's kind of flying at you. So going, clearing out the stuff that nutritionally you don't want to be eating, and maybe the other people in your household also don't really need it. clear those things out, clear out some of the clutter. And then that allows us the space to bring in these things that are truly nourishing for our bodies. So that's going to be the first step I would say is like, what are we clearing out? And then what are we bringing in? So there's so many lists of how to stock the perfect kitchen. And this is what I'll be going through. This is just a snapshot of what we keep in the kitchen pretty much at all times. And having these allows me to make most types of dishes that I would want to make, especially when it's just in a pinch. These are things that are kind of just the core staples. If you've got a recipe, there might be different specialty herbs, spices, different types of meats or proteins, fish that you're adding in. But these are kind of just more like the staple ingredients to have on hand. So think of this as like the fueled version of your butter, flour, sugar. So this is just your staples. So when we're looking at dry goods and kind of what's in place of the flour, the sugar, I try to always have on hand almond flour and coconut flour. Um, not just because they're gluten free. The fact that they're gluten free is a bonus for people, but almond flour and coconut flour compared to all purpose white flour are very high in fiber, protein, healthy fats, plant-based fats. So I like to use almond flour and or coconut flour in place of white flour anytime I can. Also in place of whole wheat flour. So whole wheat flour doesn't really have any difference in carbs or calories. A little bit more fiber than white flour, but whole wheat flour is still not that great. It also can kind of have a mealy, gritty consistency. And almond flour, coconut flour are going to have a much smoother consistency, much more like flour. So those are two that I always have on hand. Because those are the two flours that I usually use, I also always have xanthan gum on hand, and that's for baking. We've talked about that before in several different podcasts. But if you're using gluten-free flours like almond or coconut flour, you need to add something like xanthan gum, or you can add a little gelatin or protein powder. But that basically gives it the structure and texture that you would normally get from gluten. So, and xanthan gum, you use like usually a quarter teaspoon to a teaspoon at a time. So the little bag might be $10, $14, but it'll last you forever. What I'll do with the little xanthan gum bag, I open it, I'll use it first time. I put it and kind of just roll it up, put it in a Tupperware, or if I'm taking things out like xanthan gum out of the package and putting it in a Tupperware, I just cut out the label of the xanthan gum bag, tape it onto the top so that I'll remember what's in there. And then Swerve, of course, we've talked about that a lot before. And we actually have an entire podcast with the president and CEO of Swerve, Andress Blackwell. Incredibly inspiring, hilarious woman. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, scroll back. It's Behind the Brand with Swerve. But Swerve has a granular, confectioners, and brown sugar replacer. I truly do try to have all of these on hand, especially the granular and confectioners. But if you like to do things like cookies that you would use brown sugar for, having the Swerve brown sugar is going to be key as well. Those are some that I just always have. So for baking, we've got you covered with almond flour, coconut flour, xanthan gum, Swerve of the different varieties, and then of course cocoa powder and vanilla extract. And then coconut milk, I like to keep canned, unsweetened coconut milk. That's great if you are doing anything that's like a richer, thicker sauce. It can be, you can make it savory, you can make it sweet, but you can do it sweet like with Swerve to make almost like a sweetened condensed milk. But the canned, unsweetened coconut milk ends up being really versatile in soups and sauces, as well as doing kind of sweets or desserts with it. And then broth or stock, I like to do unsalted, but I especially like to use bone broth um, because it's higher protein. And so you can find that usually you can find it in like little boxes, like you would do a box of broth or stock. You can do bone broth, and you can do chicken or turkey or beef. But the bone broth is rich in collagen and rich in protein, and some are really salty, some are not. So if sodium's an issue, of course, look for unsalted. So those are kind of like really easy pantry staples that can help kind of make the foundation, serve as a foundation for a lot of recipes. There's obviously a ton more, but those are kind of my top ones. So the other thing is oils. Which oils are you going to keep on hand? So I like to have a variety of different types because depending on how we're using them, the type of oil we're using matters. So extra virgin olive oil, I love the flavor. I like to buy it as cloudy as possible. It's rich, it's flavorful, it's very bold in color. But we can't really bring it to a really high temperature. So I like to use that if I'm dipping into it, if I'm drizzling it, if it's on a salad. But if I'm going to be cooking something to a high temperature, I use the light olive oil. I don't love the way it tastes. It doesn't really have much flavor at all, but you can bring it to a much higher temperature without it reaching its smoke point. So whenever an oil reaches its smoke point, not good. The carcinogens form, cancer-causing compounds are forming in there. So we want to try to not allow that to happen. So if you're cooking at high heat, you're using that cast iron skillet, bringing it real high, that's where you'd want to use light olive oil instead of the extra virgin olive oil. Use extra virgin where you're not really heating it up that much. Another oil that I like to use for high temperature cooking like that is avocado oil. And the price point varies on this a lot. Costco does have an avocado oil. It's not nearly as flavorful as some of the really expensive brands, but it is like the light olive oil. You can raise it to a high smoke point. So for cooking, high temp, I'll use light olive oil or avocado oil. Again, both you can get at places like Costco or Sam's. For just flavor, I keep the extra virgin olive oil. I also like some that are infused, chili spice, all that kind of stuff. I also keep coconut oil on hand and I keep it just in the pantry, but it's a solid at room temp. So you can use it in place of butter. So usually in baking, I'll not only use all those different flour alternatives we talked about, almond flour, coconut, etc. But I'll use coconut oil as anytime I can, and I'm using that in place of butter. So I keep coconut oil on hand at all times. Um, and then, of course, things like nonstick cooking spray. Apple cider vinegar is one type of vinegar I always have. I use it in the morning. Done an entire podcast on that as far as the benefits of apple cider vinegar. But we can also use it in cooking and salad dressings, vinaigrettes, marinades. And then balsamic vinegar. I love to have just a true traditional balsamic vinegar. I also really like a balsamic reduction or glaze where it's thicker, putting that over the fresh mozzarella with tomatoes or fruit or something like that. So those are some of the things that I keep in my pantry. Um, Herbs and spices. I like to always have fresh ginger root. You can have just the root. You can keep it on your counter and you can kind of grate it or shave it. Um, that to me is one of the easiest. You can also buy ginger paste if that's more your speed and keep that in the fridge. Garlic. I know a lot of our chefs don't love this, but I'll kind of do the cheat and I'll buy it already minced in the jar, but having it fresh is just gonna be best. Personally, I don't love a lot of garlic, but I include it in this list because a lot of people do. So for me, if I'm just doing a little bit of mince, that's fine because I'm not really craving that flavor. But if you really love garlic, keep fresh ginger root, keep fresh garlic on hand. It takes just a split second um, to prepare it, to be able to use it, and the difference it's gonna make in that dish is gonna be huge. For hot sauce, my go-to is Tabasco. The reason is compared to other hot sauces, Tabasco has a fraction of the sodium. So it basically has like 35 milligrams of sodium for a teaspoon, whereas some other kind of Cajun type hot sauces have like 240 milligrams of sodium in a teaspoon. So Tabasco is just kind of our go-to for hot sauce. Sea salt, I really like. Sea salt isn't really any lower sodium than regular salt, but the granules are so much more, they're so much bigger. You get a lot more flavor, a lot more impact for what you're using. And so I keep the sea salt with the salt grinder. Same thing with the black peppercorns with the pepper grinder. So anytime we're using those spices, the ginger, the garlic, the pepper, the salt, fresh ground, you're of course getting so much more punch, so much more impact. Um, Not necessarily considered a grocery, but in the same herbs and spices, I keep herb plants on the counter next to the sink, and they can just be small. But the ones I like to have that are just my favorites are basil and rosemary. But whatever you like, if you're always buying fresh herbs, save the money and just buy that herb plant. And then you're not buying them fresh every time. You've got that plant, you cut it, and you're good to go. So those are some of the kind of like shelf stable things that I'll do. I guess also in the pantry is things like collagen powder, protein powder. If you are making protein smoothies, smoothies adding the collagen in there, but you can also use these in baking, and it can be huge. Um, so I would say that those are 2 that, you know, I do always keep those on hand. If it's a protein powder, I like to go vanilla. You can do plant-based or whey, but I like to use vanilla so that that way if I am doing something that's baked, I can add that in. So if you are doing things like, let's just say you're doing whole grain pancakes or cookies or something like that, a lot of times you can sneak in a scoop or 2 of that, again, whey or plant-based vanilla protein powder, and especially if you got kids who are maybe picky eaters, that's just an easy way to boost protein. Then in the fridge, this is pretty simple. This is things like, and these also, y'all, are things that are like kind of the running list to have for things that are not grab and go options. Once we talk grab and go, what's in your pantry, that's a whole different deal. I love things like instead of chips, because I love salty crunchy. So instead of keeping chips on hand, which for me are a weakness, I like to have the little Parmesan cheese crackers. But again, that huge bag of them can be like dangerous. So I like to buy them in the little individual bags. I go back to Costco again, but Costco has them. The brand is called Wisps, WHISPS, Wisps. And they are in the little single serving bags. And it's basically like little 1 ounce bags of the cheese crisp. They give you that salty, crunchy, but in that little portion control bag. There's another brand that I like. It's called Just the Cheese, and they're packaged kind of like a protein bar is, but they're basically like 2 little sheets in there, kind of like how 2 granola bars would be stacked on top of each other. But they are just the Parmesan cheese kind of baked into that shape. So they're really easy. They're really portable. They give you that salty crunch, but in a built in portion controlled way. So those are 2 things that I always have in the pantry. I always keep dark chocolate, 70% or more, all different types. Sometimes it has a little bit of chili in it. Sometimes it's the little truffles, the little individuals, or sometimes it's a bar. But we almost always have the 70 or higher percent chocolate in there. And then protein bars. And I'll kind of go through cycles of which ones are my favorite. Currently, one of my favorites is bulletproof. So I don't love reaching for a protein bar. I would much rather use those ingredients I just talked about to make something. But obviously, time sometimes we're pressed, and so having something you can grab and go. I like to grab a bulletproof bar, or there's some called Oatmega. There's so many different protein bars that are high protein, low sugar, and having those in that pantry, just if you need it in a pinch, can be key. So most of what I'm talking about though is for ingredients to stock your kitchen, but also think about what are some of those go to things that you're going to reach for, like when you're in a rush out the door. Um, so, our fridge, Greek yogurt, of course, always have that. We can make dips with it. You can add it to smoothies, you can add it to sauces. You could do a horseradish aioli with it. There's just so much that you can do with Greek yogurt. You can have it just out of the carton, top it, add it to, add fruit to it. But 2% is what I go with, not fat free, for taste, texture, flavor, all of that. And always I have cartons of that, and sometimes the big pints or quarts, depending on if I'm going to be using it in a recipe. So Greek yogurt is going to be key because I use it not only like I would traditionally use yogurt, but I'll also use it for recipes when they call for sour cream or mayonnaise. I'm going to use that Greek yogurt almost every time. I like to use, I'm not a big milk drinker, but I do like almond milk or coconut milk. So the 2 that I'll usually keep, I'll go back and forth. Sometimes almond milk, sometimes coconut milk. I kind of like the coconut milk a little better. It's thicker, it's richer. But the key on all of those is going to be to be sure that it's unsweetened. So for me, I'll do unsweetened vanilla coconut milk or unsweetened vanilla almond milk. Again, almond milk thinner, coconut milk thicker. Both of them are great that they are very low sugar, very low carb. What they don't have though is protein. So if you do need the protein, you're not getting it with most almond milks or coconut milks, but they are good for just as you would normally, be using a recipe or anything else. Um, Eggs, of course, always on hand. Goat cheese. This is kind of the go-to cheese that I'll have. It's easy to put out if you have people come over. Put some goat cheese out with some fresh fruit, some whole grain crackers. But I also like to crumble some of the goat cheese into a salad as I'm tossing it up. Goat cheese is one of the lower sodium cheeses, about 75% less sodium than feta. So it's one that we always just keep on hand. Again, it's pretty versatile. Fresh berries, any variety, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, whatever's in season. I always try to keep those in the fridge and reach for that whenever kind of craving something sweet, or adding them to a smoothie, adding them to that Greek yogurt. Flavored sparkling waters is huge. If you've got a fridge full of soft drinks, start edging them out. Even if it's diet soft drinks, start edging some of those out in favor of the flavored sparkling waters. And there's so many different varieties now. Find one that you like. There's different brands, there's different flavors. Something like LaCroix has been around forever. There's other brands like Waterloo has even more intense flavors. And then stores are all coming out with their store brands. So find some that you like, and ideally, if you've got soft drinks or diet soft drinks in there, start to edge them out with your flavored sparkling water. And then finally, in our fridge, I usually keep coffee concentrate. I like to have this as a usually I'll do hot coffee, but if I'm going to do an iced coffee, I'll just use coffee concentrate. I use cold brew, and I'll put it with the unsweetened almond milk or coconut milk, or a splash of half and half, which I also always have that in the fridge. Um, or I'll mix it, I'll put it in the blender with collagen powder, the vanilla protein powder, and make a collagen protein smoothie. So those are just some of the key that we could go on forever. Like you could literally go through the entire grocery store. But those are just some of the key essentials that I try to always have on hand, so that no matter what, if I'm looking at a recipe, if I want to make something really quickly, I've kind of got those core staples. So switching gears to kitchen tools, there's a couple little gadgets that I always like to have also. One is going to be a spiralizer. A lot of people have it. It looks like a little cone at both ends, and you can spiralize zucchini, carrots, beets, squash. You can buy all those veggies spiralized now in the fresh produce section, or even in the freezer section. But they're also really easy to make on your own. So spiralizer is easy because then you're also versatile. You are not limited to which vegetables you do. Um, and then a mandolin. If you haven't used a mandolin, it's be careful. For one, it's super sharp, but it allows us to like shave and like slice foods into like super like paper thin slices that are also really consistent. So if you've gone to restaurants and you see like a beautiful like watermelon radish and it's like this paper thin and they're sprinkled over your salad, that's what they're using as a mandolin for that. But they come with different attachments that you can do different shapes and stuff like that. But I like it just for like super thin slices like that. You can use it for beets, radishes, watermelon to put onto a salad, but you can also use it for vegetables. Like let's just even say like a sweet potato. And then you can spread some with a little bit of olive oil and put it in the oven and bake little sweet potato chips. So it's just a way, carrots, you could do the same thing there. Beets, also the same thing with beets, kind of do oven dried beet chips. But the mandolin gives you consistency, and it allows you to slice it much thinner than most of us could do with like as steady as our hand can be. So the mandolin just gives you a lot more control over that to make these paper thin slices with your veg. So the spiralizer, a mandolin, um, a microplane. So I love a little microplane. I use it as a cheese grater. I use it to zest the rind off of citrus. You can use it for grating garlic. You can even use it to shred butter. Just make sure the butter's chilled to shred that into recipes. But the little microplane is key. And then finally, the immersion blender. This makes it easy to clean up. And because you can blend ingredients straight into like the pot that you're cooking with, or the bowls are going to be served in for sauces or soups. And actually, one more thing that I use all the time, parchment paper. I just feel like it makes cleanup so easy. So if you are going to be roasting vegetables, for example, in your sheet pan, just spreading it with the parchment paper is huge for cleanup. It makes cleanup just so much easier, and also helps with sticking. If you are buying parchment paper, make sure it's parchment paper. I have had people tell me they've used wax paper, and it's not the same thing. So parchment paper can go into the oven and take the heat, but the wax paper can't, and it could melt, or worse, catch on fire. So make sure you're using parchment paper if it's going to go into the oven. A lot of times we think of parchment paper for cookies, but you can also use it for roasted vegetables and stuff like that. So that, as you're kind of thinking of wellness goals coming up and stocking the perfect kitchen and How are you going to surround yourself with these tools to make it easy to eat nutritiously? Those are some of the keys that I keep in the kitchen. I think also really think through what is in your car. If you spend a lot of time in your car, maybe in a commute, making sure you've got things there that are non perishable that you can reach for. Um, the high protein, low sugar bar that we were talking about, something like Bulletproof, or those little cheese crisp, like the just the cheese bars or the wisp can be great in your car. These can also work really well in your office. Nuts, of course, whatever type you like, if they're roasted, raw, lightly salted, just making sure that you've got things that where you're spending your time and you find yourself craving. And if you're at work, you're hitting the vending machine, or if you're in your car and you're swinging through a drive through or like a convenience store, start to stock those places as well with things that are basically going to look at it as kind of like insulating yourself and surrounding yourself with all these things to kind of help you reach those wellness goals. So, again, the list goes on and on and on of what we could have in our fridge, in our freezer. I didn't even mention freezer. Actually, in freezer, I'll just say real quick too, berries. I love to keep frozen fruits. You can buy frozen berries. They are just as nutritious as fresh. You can buy if you have these fantastic berries that you're buying in season, but it's more than you would eat. Go ahead and freeze them, or you can buy fruit, of course, already frozen. Um, Ice cream. There's so many different ice creams now that are higher protein, lower sugar. I like Halo Top is still probably my go-to on that, but there's a newer one called Rebel that's also really good. So, that's one that if you are kind of a sweet person, an ice cream person, I do like to keep that on hand. I'm not a big frozen dinner person personally. That's not something I'll usually take up freezer space. I'm usually using the freezer more if we do have a batch of something we've used that we've got leftovers from. But one thing that I do like to use in there is, or keep in there, is steam in the bag vegetables. So I really much, much, much prefer fresh vegetables. But if you're in a pinch, frozen vegetables are just as nutritious as many of the fresh ones we're going to buy in the grocery store. Different deal if you're buying something at the farmer's market. It hasn't traveled. It's local. You're getting it shortly after it's grown and you're eating it right then. That's going to be high nutrient. But a lot of the things that we're going to buy in our normal supermarket produce section, it's been days or longer that it's been exposed to light, heat, travel, all these different conditions. And so we're not getting it right when it's fresh picked. And these vegetables, many of them, when they are frozen right after harvest. So if we're looking at traditional supermarket vegetables compared to frozen, it's probably about the same. So again, I don't love them as much. I like the texture, the flavor of freshly prepared vegetables. But for things like spinach or things that maybe have like a high level of a lot of preparation that would go into it, um, or you feel like there's waste, like you only like the florets of broccoli or florets of cauliflower, you might do better to buy just the frozen version of that than the whole thing fresh. So, vegetables that are the steam in the bag or vegetables that just make it easy. Basically, if it's making it easier for you to eat more vegetables and you're using the frozen ones, I'm not worried about that. I like to have those in hand as kind of on hand as a backup in the freezer. Just watching if the sauces, the all the add-ins, keep it as plain as possible, and then you get to decide what goes on it. So that is kind of a quick roundup of um, Stock the Perfect Kitchen 101. Again, we could go on a lot longer. There's so many other things. But the other things that are going to come in are going to be based on what you're preparing. If you're bringing in specific, proteins, what fish or what seafood or um, what specific vegetables you have, all of that's going to rotate. So these that we talked about are kind of just those core staples that if you always have them on hand, then whatever lean proteins you bring in, whatever whole grains or vegetables you're bringing in, you've got things that you can easily kind of whip something up. Um, One more thing that I'm going to have to wrap it up because I'll keep going. But one more thing I did forget to mention is pasta. We talked about the spiralizer for pasta swaps, but one thing we always keep in the pantry as well is a chickpea pasta or a lentil pasta. So Banza is kind of our go-to brand for chickpea pasta because you can make a chilled pasta salad. I love doing like a Greek yogurt sauce and making a chilled pasta salad You can do hot pasta with like a marinara type thing on it. We can do you can do like a mac and cheese. There's a lot of different ways we can make healthier mac and cheese sauces. I love using another ingredient I keep on hand too is nutritional yeast. If you haven't tried it, the name is horrible. It needs better PR. But nutritional yeast, you can buy it in the can or you can buy it like in a bulk bin, a can that kind of looks like a Kraft Parmesan can a lot of times, or a bulk bin, like at a place like Whole Foods. But nutritional yeast, kind of it's powdery. It's a little bit like a Parmesan cheese, but it's vegan. It's super high in B vitamins. And it's also versatile. It's a way to kind of add that a cheesy nuttiness, but with something that's completely vegan. And so that's another little staple that it adds a savoriness. It kind of adds like an earthiness to dishes. Even if you're not making a vegan dish, it can still add kind of a nice compliment. So with that, I'll wrap it up because again, we could keep going, going, going. If there's things that you're like, hey, how did you miss this? This is like a key staple. Email me, Molly at mollykimball.com, because I do always love to hear from y'all. This is one we could easily do a part 2 of how to stock the perfect kitchen, office, car, gym bag. So I'm sure there's a ton that I have overlooked that you love. Let me know, Molly at mollykimball.com. I'll also include a few of the links to products that I mentioned in the notes of this episode. So I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life possible.